Now, Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan says there's an orchestrated sabotage of Eskom's infrastructure from within the organization. And he joins me now live. Minister, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on eNCA. If I may start, we will delve into the budget vote speech, but if I might just start and get your comment on what Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe there was saying. He's saying that he doesn't understand why Eskom, the power utility, is resorting to blackouts. He says it has enough electricity in its reserves.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon to your listeners as well and viewers. The fact of the matter is that, firstly, we don't have blackouts. Blackout is a technical term used in that industry, which says that you have a complete collapse, as you had in California some years ago, which we don't have in South Africa. Secondly, load shedding takes place as a result of a decision by what is called the systems operator, who has to balance the supply of electricity or megawatts with the demand for megawatts. So if the demand for megawatts is 30,000 and the supply is 28,000 megawatts, then let's say a level of load shedding has to take place in order to keep the transmission grid stable so that we don't get to a blackout stage, or we don't get to a stage H stage, which has been misinterpreted in the public as well. So load shedding is necessary to secure and to protect the transmission grid. The third point is that in the power stations across the world and in the Eskom system as well, you have what are called nameplate capacity, which means that, for example, you have a car, and on the speedometer of the car, it says you can do 220 kilometers an hour. Now, when you actually try to get anywhere near, you might get close to 180, but you're not able to achieve 220 for whatever reason. Similarly, in an electrical system like Eskom's, you have what is called an installed capacity of 44,000 megawatts. But there are units in old power stations like Hendrina Power Station that are no longer functional. You have crude flay, which, or Komati, that has just one out of its units functional. You have crude flay, which is also an old power station, which is not fully functional. So there's a gap between what it is supposed to deliver and what it actually delivers, either through, inverted commas, age, poor maintenance, or because some of the units have been shut down in preparation for what is called the decommissioning of power stations.
Okay.
Now, what this results in is a gap between what the demand is at a particular point in time, as I explained, and what is available at a particular point in time. And Eskom has been saying for some time that in order to conduct proper maintenance, which hasn't been done for about a decade or so, it requires a safety margin. And that safety margin is somewhere around 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts. That will be delivered at the current, in the current situation, when all of the renewable energy bids actually come to fruition. In other words, once a bid is awarded to yourself, Tony, for example, and you say, I'm going to put up 500 megawatt solar plant in Northern Cape or wherever it is, it takes you anything between 18 months and 2 years for regulatory reasons and construction reasons to actually put that plant up. Okay. So we don't have that 6,000 right now.
Yes.
So I'm sorry to sound like but you need to simplify things so that we don't misunderstand each other. Thank you.
Okay, no, fair enough, Minister. Let's get to your the budget vote speech, and you titled it "Time to Rebuild Better Together: A People-Centered Approach." And you were saying that it is appropriate to ask, why do we do all this, and who benefits? And here you're talking about acts of the greedy, the corrupt, and so forth. Which brings me to the subject of sabotage. And if I may ask yourself, Minister, why is this being done, and who is benefiting from this sabotage?
Well, let's broaden it. There's sabotage, there's fraud, there's corruption in the procurement system, there's overpricing that is happening, there is poor quality coal that is actually delivered at power stations. And what is being learned in Eskom is that you actually have, let's call it value chains of syndicates or persons who are involved in engaging in these kinds of activities. So a particular quality of coal is ordered from a particular mine. It's then trucked between that mine and the power station. Somewhere along the line, the coal that leaves the mine is mixed with metal, rubble, stones, whatever. Somebody in Eskom signs off for that coal. That coal, inverted commas, goes into the power plant. Firstly, your mills get damaged. Secondly, your boilers get damaged. Thirdly, you get boiler tube leaks. And you then have a dysfunctional power station or unit, and that causes the breakdown. That means you lose maybe up to 600 megawatts if it's a fully functional unit. And if you have a few of those happening at the same time, for one or other reason, you actually have a loss of capacity. So these things are happening, they're real, and they happen every day, or every other day, so to speak.
And what is being done, Minister, if I may jump in, what has been done to bring these syndicates to book?
So as I said in the speech, in the first instance, the trucking companies or individuals are hired by the mining companies. So I've had the first interaction through the Minerals Council with many of the mining companies, but that's across the board. But there's going to be a specific interaction with the coal mining companies, and we want assurances from them that what is ordered is what is delivered. And what is delivered is according to the quality of coal that is required by a specific power station. So that is what is going to be done. But secondly, those who are inside of Eskom and who are part of the scheme must be dealt with by the management of Eskom. And they will be identified and dealt with in due course.
Okay. Now, earlier on, Minister, you announced a new shareholder model for state-owned companies, a holding company for commercial entities to be set up. Can you just expand on that for us?
Well, as the President announced in the 2022 State of the Nation address, firstly, that he had established a presidential SOC council, and this council consists of half the number of people coming from the private sector and the other half coming from within government, that is cabinet. Secondly, that this council, particularly the private sector side, which has been working through 3 different work streams, one on finance, one on governance, and one on consolidation and a review of the SOCs, small or big, to decide which ones should be kept, which ones shouldn't be kept, which ones of them should be consolidated in one form or another. And part of the comparative study done in an earlier review in about 2014 by the department itself, and subsequently also by members of this council, and doing this comparative work with other countries, the conclusion was reached that one required a centralized shareholder model. And what that means is that as the president said in his address, you want a model of shareholding in South Africa of these public entities, which ensures that big entities within the state are dealt with on a proper commercial basis. They achieve financial and operational viability. Thirdly, they are not subject to political interference. And fourthly, there's a separation between policy making, the management and governance of these entities, and the regulatory functions the regulators actually have. So this has been work that's been going on for some time and will reach its culmination in the next few months.
Do you think political interference is a big problem when it comes to the operations of SOEs?
Well, I think Chief Justice Zondo has just told all of us through his various reports that that has been the case in the past, and that has led to massive losses of money, but also a massive breakdown in the functionality of some of the important SOEs like PRASA, Transnet, Eskom, Denel, SAA, etc. So we've got to move away from that stage, learn the lessons of that period, and construct a different model so that these are assets of the South African public. They're not any individual's assets, and they need to be properly looked after for future generations as well.
Talking about restructuring, let's talk about Eskom's restructuring. Where are we with that, Minister?
Where we are is that in the first instance, we said that as government, Eskom must separate generation from transmission and distribution. So generation is these power plants and now renewable investments that are taking place. Transmission are all the wires that you see crossing the country, and there's thousands of kilometers of that wire or transmission grid, and that is responsible for taking electricity from where it is produced to where it is required. And distribution is the local reticulation or supply of electricity, for example, within a municipality. Just let me stop this. And the first task that was given was to actually ensure that the transmission company is separated, and the target date was December last year. That has been achieved. A transmission company has been established, an interim board is in place. It will soon have its own board as well. And that becomes an important component in the new electricity setup that we will see evolving in South Africa. And Minister Mantashe has introduced legislation in Parliament that begins to take us in that direction. So what we will have in the next few years is firstly, the generation of electricity by the public and by the public sector and the private sector. Secondly, you will have the transmission grid available to all of the producers of electricity so they can connect with this grid and distribute the electricity. Thirdly, you will have a systems operator and market operator that will be independent of all of these entities and will buy electricity from both, for example, coal-powered stations and from renewable sources as well, and feed it into the transmission grid itself. So that's the future that we are heading towards. And soon there will also be the separation of generation and distribution, but all of this will fall within a new holding company that will be the future Eskom. So we're making good progress.
Okay. All right. Minister, if I may move on to SAA, still within the budget vote speech. Where are we in terms of the implementation of the business rescue plan?
No, the business rescue process started in early December 2019 when the board at the time realized that SAA is no longer viable in its own right without more money coming into it, and government was not in a position to put in more money. And prior to that, government had already decided that our aviation assets should be restructured. Then came along business rescue that lasted until April 2021. And during that period, there was firstly dealing with the creditors who received a few cents in the rand in terms of what was available at the time. Secondly, a staff of over 4,500 was reduced to about 700 and odd thousand, I beg your pardon, 700. And the rest, we had proper voluntary severance packages that were issued to them. Thirdly, the state had to start looking for a private sector partner during that period who would be willing to bring in operating capital, that is money that will actually enable the airline to run. And about 30 expressions of interest were received. An independent transaction advisor was appointed, and they evaluated each of those bids. But as the pandemic got worse and stepped into 2021, many of the interested parties couldn't find the money or didn't want to put the money in that was required. As a consequence, we were left with what today is the Takatso Consortium, which was willing to put in 3 billion rands of operating capital. And that led to an MOU being signed. And the details of that MOU were, once Cabinet had approved it, made very public at that point in time as well. And what followed was due diligence processes, that is where everybody looks into everybody else's accounts and checks what exactly is available, the valuation of different assets, and ultimately an agreement on what basis this transaction will actually occur. So in the first instance, it's 3 billion rands that go into the operating capital. In the second instance, there's 3 billion rands of assets that will be paid for through preferential shares. In other words, government will have the first preference to receive dividends once SAA begins to make a profit, which hopefully will be shortly. And then the third is that government was entitled to and negotiated a golden share. And what that means is that the name SAA and the brand SAA belongs to government. If the airline is to be sold by the majority partner, government consent is required, and there were several other conditions that were attached to this. Much is made by certain media people about whether and how Treasury was involved, but these are all cabinet decisions. They're not decisions made by me or any other individual. So the Minister of Finance is a member of cabinet. So all of these processes have gone through cabinet, and my job and the job of the department is to implement those decisions.
Okay.
And where we are currently is that we have to go to the Competition Commission and certain other regulatory bodies, and hopefully in the next few months we conclude that process and conclude this transaction.
Now, Minister, when it comes to SOEs, we're always talking about governance and oversight. What are you putting in place in terms of that governance and oversight when it comes to SOEs, in terms of improving that? What can we expect?
Well, ultimately, when we get the holding company going, we will have the right kind of expertise. So firstly, you will require experts in energy to be able to understand how you hold accountable Eskom or its equivalent as it unfolds and evolves, like I've indicated earlier on. Secondly, we will need financial experts who are able to understand the financials of an entity and whether the right decisions are being made or not being made, and whether the entity is viable or not. And thirdly, you're going to require the right kind of corporate management as well. So that's the vision of where we need to get to. And at the moment, the manner in which oversight takes place is that the shareholder, which is government, and the relevant department drafts a memorandum of incorporation, which basically sets out what is the mandate overall and the governance terms of an SOE. Secondly, each year you have a shareholder compact, which sets out the deliverables of a particular entity, and these are measured on a quarterly basis. And thirdly, there are regular meetings with managements and boards to account for them to account on what they've done or not done. And fourthly, in the situation we find ourselves in currently, many of these entities have to refashion what they're doing and how they're going about doing it. So Eskom is one example where this restructuring and the separation is taking place. Transnet would be another example where it's on the one hand got to recover from its horrible past and the corruption that took place, but at the same time it needs to improve the logistics in the country and refashion the way in which they operate in our ports and rail, all of which requires a lot of hard work to get to move in the right direction.
Okay. You also mentioned Transnet's successes in your budget speech. If you may, Minister, maybe just name two successes of Transnet, because obviously for our country to grow, the economy to grow, Transnet has to be 100%.
No, absolutely. So there are both challenges and successes. So let me be very honest with you and the public. But on the successes side, the auto industry is a significant manufacturing entity in South Africa. And the relationship between Transnet and Toyota, for example, in eThekwini, the relationship in the Eastern Cape with auto manufacturers there, the new relationship that will be created as a result of the investment of Ford in Swane to the tune of 16 or 17 billion rands, which will require the vehicles they produce to be exported through Rebecca. And that will also require huge investment in developing rail infrastructure from a place called Kalfontein in the Eastern Cape to Rebecca itself. All these are examples of very successful operations. The second good example is the iron ore and manganese line from Sishen to Saldanha Bay. And some of that also goes to Rebecca as well. And there are constant interactions where industry has the opportunity to complain and moan if things are not right. And I interact with them as well as the management of Transnet. And as much as possible, we try to ensure that Transnet responds to their needs. For example, the export of citrus and other fruit, that season is coming up in the next week or two, and special arrangements are being made at the various ports in order to make sure that that industry is able to export whatever it actually produces. There's one area of difficulty that we must be frank about and open about, and that is the transport of coal. And the major problem that Transnet is facing is the shortage of locomotives. And you might remember, or the South African public might remember, that one of the rotten things that happened during the state capture period in Transnet is the so-called 1064 deal, that is 1,064 locomotives, some of which were manufactured and delivered, and a significant number have not been delivered. One by a Canadian company, which has been very slow in delivery and manufacturing, and the other by a Chinese company as well. And some of that has gone into court processes, but the Transnet management is currently engaging with these entities to see if an out-of-court settlement can be found, the locomotives can be made available, parts can be made available, and maintenance can be done on those locomotives that have difficulties at the moment. But the shortage of locomotives within Transnet is causing a major problem as far as the coal export is concerned.
Okay. Minister, I just want to go back to Eskom, because obviously this is, it's on everybody's lips. It's everybody's concern, whether it be a school, your home, a small business, large enterprise. And I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier on. You said you'll be seeking assurances of good quality coal from the coal suppliers. If you don't get those assurances, or if they don't deliver the type of coal that you require, are you willing to cancel contracts?
But I don't enter into contracts. That's a decision that Eskom has to make.
Yeah.
My job is to make sure that I assist Eskom and the mining companies to actually sit around the table and get them to understand the difficulties that are being created at the moment, and also create an understanding that the manner in which things are being done at the moment is not satisfactory, and that something needs to give and something needs to change. And I'm sure that we have reasonable leaders in the mining companies who will be responsive to the kind of issues that we are raising. And they're aware of those issues anyway.
And the reason why I ask this, I know, Minister, you're not directly responsible for those particular contracts, but you have the oversight over Eskom. You can say, listen, this particular person is not fulfilling their contract. Surely something must be done. And also, if I may just ask as well, in terms of the sabotage that we've been seeing, what is being done to improve security at some of our power stations?
Now, this is receiving the attention at the highest level because we can't afford to have criminals and what I've called counter-revolutionaries who are going to very knowledgeably damage parts that are essential to the good functioning of power stations, to go on as if there's not going to be any consequences in this particular regard. And so that's the one side. The second side is the operations. And in the speech, you will find that we are, the Eskom management and board, firstly, are bringing in some experienced power station managers, putting in a special mentoring program, a hand-holding program to help the power station managers who might not have 20 years experience, which is what you require to run a good power station or run it well. And also a training program that lapsed some time ago will be restarted in order to ensure that the power station management is constantly upgraded and updated in terms of both technology, but also leadership skills that they actually require. So these are some of the measures that are being undertaken. We obviously need better surveillance within power stations also. But from what I'm told, the people who are engaged in this kind of nasty activity are able to actually evade cameras. They are able to understand exactly what needs to be damaged, removed, or sabotaged in order to make a particular unit non-functional. And these are all called single points of failure, meaning if you damage this particular part, that unit will not operate. That means anything between 400 and 600 megawatts is lost until you repair. Some of those repairs take a day, some of those repairs take many days, and that also contributes to the load shedding that the South African public is confronted with. So we understand the difficulties, as you say, schools, home, etc. But what we also want is an understanding that workers at Eskom who are honest and straightforward must start exposing those who are involved in this activity, whether they're from outside Eskom or within Eskom. And the South African public must also join us in making sure that if they're aware of some of these activities taking place by a neighbor, a friend, or whatever the case is, that they report them to the police or the necessary law enforcement authorities as well. And that's what I mean when I say that all of us need to take responsibility, get involved so that we can put this country on the right road.
100%. Speaking of responsibility, Minister, are you satisfied at the moment with the job that Andre de Ruyter is doing?
Absolutely. And, you know, he's offering the best service that one can offer from a CEO. No one person is going to be able to solve all of our problems. And what we require is all of these plans that we are talking about and all of the actions that we are talking about to be synchronized in an appropriate way, together with defending the Eskom plant and Eskom personnel against the corrupt and the nasties, so to speak, that are clearly intent on ensuring that this country does not thrive, that the economy does not grow, and that young people don't get jobs as a consequence of the energy interruptions that we actually have.
Okay, Minister, thank you so much for speaking with us. So when it comes to your budget speech, you're saying time to rebuild better together, a people-centered approach, and we wish you luck with that. I agree with you, better together. Thank you so much, Minister Pravin Gordhan speaking to us there, touching on so many different issues, especially on the Eskom issue that I suppose we're all experiencing today in so many different ways.